Thanks, Cecilia. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks very much. Thanks to all of you for turning out tonight. I imagine a lot of you are here because you have to be for a class. Yes? No? Yeah? Okay. But thanks a lot. And thanks very much to John Barr and all of the committee on the Authors and Ideas series very much for having me. I really appreciate it. I love a chance to talk about Rand and her radical ideas. As you can see from the title on your handout, I'm talking about Rand's image of the virtuous egoist. So I'm just focusing on some of her moral thinking tonight, not the whole gamut of her philosophy, okay? And as soon as you put the words virtuous egoist together, you know, one might well wonder, what the hell is that about, right? I mean, the concept is jarring because we're not accustomed to hearing selfish people, egoists, characterized as virtuous. Indeed, in our culture, we typically think of virtue as one thing, and egoism or selfishness is not simply something else, but as the antithesis of virtue, as diametrically opposed to morality. I mean, pretty much we're all raised to think that selfishness is the thing you're supposed to overcome, right, in order to be a good person. The heroes, the moral saints, the exemplars, the people we're supposed to try to be like are more, you know, the martyrs, the saints, the Mother Teresas, the people who deprive themselves for the sake of others. And even if you think about some of our richest people in our country, in the world, the Bill Gates, the Warren Buffetts, what do we praise them for? Not the products that they made that might have been really useful to a lot of people, but the giving back that they do after they retire or when they shift to a different phase of their careers, right? It's the giving pledge that Warren Buffett signs and encourages other wealthy people, right? We tend to praise them to the extent that they're seemingly not selfish. Rand challenges that view. That's the conventional view. Pretty much we've all been raised on it. I've been raised on it. But when you really start scratching the surface of some of the assumptions inside of that, she thinks that what we find is that there's a kind of egoism that really makes a lot of sense. And that's what I want to try to flesh out tonight. Now let me ask, have any of you ever read any Ayn Rand, fiction or nonfiction? She's written both. She's written novels, Atlas Shrugged, Fountainhead are the two most famous, and a few other novels. And she's written a lot of nonfiction essays. So let me just see again, just to have some idea of a few of you have read something or other. Okay, but most of you haven't, and that's sort of what I would expect. Okay. I'm not trying to convert anybody tonight. It would be pretty silly to try to convert people in an hour, especially with such important ideas and profound ideas as your moral philosophy, your moral code, and particularly so when somebody is proposing as radical a rethinking as Rand is. But I do want to provoke you tonight, not in the nasty sense of making a scene, but I want to provoke you to think, to really question some of what we often take for granted, to make sure it's sound, or where it is sound, or where maybe it needs some either supplementation or correction, okay? And I should stress that throughout, when I refer to egoism or Rand's egoism, I'm talking about a very specific type of egoism. She calls it rational egoism. I won't keep using that word, but it's a particular type, and not everything that everybody ever calls selfish is something that she would call selfish and recommend. Okay, and again, we can talk about that a little bit more in the question period. My approach tonight, I'm going to be talking about two broad questions. What kind of egoism is Rand defending, and what kind of virtues is she defending? Now, you've got the basic outline on the handout. I'll start by addressing the question of why we should be egoistic or selfish in her view, why she thinks that makes sense, right? Then, in the bulk of the talk, I will elaborate on what Rand means by rational egoism and what she doesn't mean. And that's really critical, I think, getting a lot of what she doesn't mean and distinguishing that from what she does have in mind. Then, finally, if there's time, I'll indicate the kinds of virtues that she thinks are really important to being an egoist. And if there's time, I'll go into just one of them, honesty, in a little bit of depth. But we'll see how we're doing time-wise. I have this bad tendency to talk too much about the early stuff and then We'll see. Run out of time. Okay. And I did publish that book, which I'm happy to hear is being sold here tonight. But the book that John Barr held up, I published that book a few years ago. And again, the subtitle is The Virtuous Egoist. And what it does is it tries to explain in different chapters each of the major moral virtues, such as honesty and courage and justice and so on, that Rand espouses as genuine moral virtues. It also talks a little bit about some of the things that the culture normally thinks of as virtues to try to see, well, what did she think about them? Were they vices? Are they okay in some circumstances but not in others, or what? So there's also some discussion in there of things like charity or generosity, okay? Even a discussion of friendship. So there's a lot more in the book, if you're interested, than what I'm going to get into tonight. But I want to give you the basic picture of what she means by egoism. And again, that's where we'll spend most of our effort. So you with me so far? Okay, good. Thank you. We love nodding crowds. That's very encouraging. Thank you. So let's get into why be egoistic. Why, and I'm using egoistic and selfish in the same basic way. Okay. Well, the case for egoism is in a way simple. You should be egoistic because you have to be in order to attain your well-being. If a person wants to live and to flourish, to achieve the kind of happiness that's possible to a human being, he must act in ways that serve that end. Egoism amounts to doing that. Egoism is the only path to that end, achieving your happiness. Now, what do I mean just by egoism here? Egoism is the thesis that each person ought to pursue his own well-being, his own self-interest. Let me say that again. Egoism is the thesis that each person ought to pursue his own self-interest. And notice, that's an ought claim. It's not a claim about what we do or the things that people do pursue. It's not a description of human behavior. As Rand is talking about in defending egoism, she's defending the idea that you should act for your own self-interest. And so should you, and so should you, and so should I. Okay, but why does that make, if that's what egoism is, the idea that you should act for your own self-interest, why does that make sense? Because we have needs. If you don't tend your needs, you won't be long for this world. If you don't tend your health, you'll get sick. If you don't feed yourself, you'll die. If you don't earn money, you won't be able to feed yourself. Now notice, in doing those sorts of things, which seem pretty innocuous, pretty unobjectionable, right? Feeding yourself, getting medicine if you're ill, and so on, right? But in doing those sorts of things, you're being self-interested. You're taking care of yourself. You're looking after your well-being. The fact is, human beings survive by acting for their own benefit, by doing things that are in their interest. Think about a small child, I mean a really small child. Let's start even at the infant level, right? But then think about an infant and the first weeks of life and the first months and years. A baby, even the newest born baby, it's got to do certain things to keep going. It doesn't have to think about them. It doesn't have to think, ooh, do I subscribe to this moral philosophy or that moral philosophy, right? But a baby has to sleep. It has to eat and digest certain, right? It has to intake certain nutrients and it has to digest them. It's got to battle infections should some infections infect it, right? And so on, right? It's got to do all these things. And we're happy when the baby does them. And then as the baby gets a little older, ooh, now it's reaching. And now it's grasping, and now it's crawling, and now it's walking, and now it's and we just think this is wonderful, and it is wonderful, right? But that's a selfish sucker, isn't it? Because in doing all those things, it's doing what's good for it, right? It is acting in its own self-interest, and we're happy, we applaud, we encourage. It's hitting the markers. Now it's doing the sorts of things it ought to be doing for its own well-being at this stage of development, and so on, right? It's not just babies who need to do this to advance their interest. Each of us does his whole life long. Indeed, this applies to any living organism, not just human beings. Any living organism. It must act in ways that are in its interest if it's to sustain its life, whether you're talking about a tree or a plant or an animal. It's got to act in certain ways to meet its needs, right? Living beings have needs, just as we do, all living beings do. If they don't satisfy those needs, they're, again, not long for this world. Now, obviously, lower forms of life don't have to debate between moral philosophies. Which one are they going to adopt, right? A worm or an amoeba doesn't decide on a particular course of action. The cactus doesn't undergo photosynthesis. I'm not in the mood today. I'm not going to do that today. No, it's just made in a certain way that these activities are internal and automatic. But the point is, every organism, however low, however sophisticated, must operate in a way that serves its life if it's to survive. Life is a process. Life is a series of activities, and I'm talking literally here, right? Life isn't an entity like a pen. It's not a static object like a microphone or a bottle, right? It's a process. A life is a lifetime, however long that lifetime might go on, right? It's a process. It's a series of activities, self-generated activities, self-sustaining activities. The point at this stage is simply this. The nature of life demands egoism, in the sense that living requires self-promoting action. Now, for human beings, just as I was saying a minute ago about lower forms of life, even for human beings, some of the requisite actions are automatic. They're physiologically hardwired in, you might say, right? We're programmed, we're genetically coded to do certain things such that, yeah, you need to breathe, but you don't need to remind yourself, oh, I need to breathe. Right? I mean, sometimes in stressful conditions, you remind you, okay, take a breath. Yeah, okay. But I don't need to put it on my to-do list, digest, heart pump in the morning. There are things you put on your list or things you don't want to forget to do, but those aren't some of them, right? Those things just, again, as long as you're healthy, they happen on their own. But if human beings acted only in those biologically programmed ways, that wouldn't be enough. We've got to direct and choose other of our actions to fulfill other of our needs, right? Needs for those things like food and shelter and clothing, medical care when we're sick. But we have other sorts of needs too. We need money to pay the bills to get some of those things. We need completely other kinds of things too, like we need some knowledge. How to treat the disease. What is good to eat and not so good to eat? I mean, we need knowledge about all sorts of things. How are we going to deal with these floods, right? We need recreation, a certain amount of recreation, rest, relaxation. We need certain kinds of relationships with other people, companionship, and so on. Again, just introducing you to this notion that, look, it's the nature of the beast, the human beast, that we have certain needs. We need to fulfill those. We need to do things that are in our interest. Egoism is rational policy. Each person ought to pursue his own self-interest because he has to, if he is to flourish, to attain happiness. Let me say just a little bit more on this part. Even while normally we tend to condemn the selfish person, oh, that's bad, that's not what you're supposed to be, right? It's good to be selfless. Notice that there are still several pockets of life where we tend to be more accepting of self-interested behavior, where we're not so quick to condemn it. Indeed, we even sometimes encourage what really is self-interested behavior. And I'll give you a few examples, but just think for a minute. I'm not going to ask you, but just think if you can think of any examples of areas in life where we do sometimes think, no, it's perfectly appropriate for her to act in that, yeah, I guess it is a self-interested way. But try to think, can you think of any examples? And I'll give a few. Yeah, you ought to ask for a raise. You deserve it. And I mean, maybe I know you well and I know the kind of work you've been doing. It's like, no, you deserve it and you should. You should at least ask for it, right? We sometimes encourage people to do that sort of thing. We say, friends talking to us about his or her relationship with some, and we say, now don't you be a doormat, don't let him or her walk all over you in that way. You stand up for yourself, sister, or whatever, right? I mean, we sometimes talk about voting your pocketbook. Okay, yeah, no, given the the kinds of taxes or minimum wage laws or whatever it might be that candidate is putting out there, would defend, and given the impact on you and your small business and so on, you ought to vote your pocketbook, okay? If you're attacked and you defend yourself, we often think that's a good thing, you should defend yourself. Look, the point I'm getting at is pretty simple. There are these little havens where we think it's perfectly appropriate for a person to act in his interest, and I think that the fact that we have these little exceptional cases testified to the general claim that I've been making, that is, we have to be egoists to some extent. We have to act for our own self-interest if we are to take good care of ourselves, our lives, our happiness. Okay? We tolerate egoism in these corners because we depend on egoism. Living requires, again, that organisms act in ways that are good for those organisms. A consistently practiced renunciation of self-interest. If you really tried to do that absolutely consistently, 100%, that would be impossible. You'd be dead. No one could survive on such a policy. All right, let me skip a little bit and turn to what I said I wanted to talk about for the bulk of the talk, and that is, so what kind of egoism does she have in mind? That's a quick capsule of why she thinks it makes sense to be an egoist. So now let's address a little bit more directly, what does she mean by being an egoist? And here on the handout, I've got several, let's see, I've got A through G. I'll try to trot through those relatively quickly, but giving some examples, again, I hope to make vivid and real the kinds of options that people face and what really goes into pursuing what's actually going to be beneficial for you, okay? So some of these are about what interest is and isn't. Some are more about what the pursuit of interest, egoism, is and isn't, okay? First thing, self-interest is not transparent. If you think about certain decisions that people frequently face, even when their aim is clear, they want to do what's best for them, how to do that isn't always clear, isn't always obvious. Example one, where to go to college. Suppose you want to go to a college that's going to be best for you, right? Suppose that objective, that goal is very clear in your mind, nothing equivocal about that. But exactly what school you should go to, that's not always just self-evident or transparent, right? What are some of the factors that would go, and let me actually ask you now, what are some of the factors that you'd want to consider to figure out what's going to be the best school for me? Prestige, okay. That might affect job prospects or how other people will greet you afterwards, okay. Other factors? Cost, right, major. How much is this going to cost? How much debt will I have to go in, right? Other things? Location, how far away from home is it? Do I want to live at home for monetary reasons or whatever reasons? Do I not want to live at home? How far is this from home? Be it a commute or halfway across the country or whatever. There are pros and cons to where this is located, right? Other, even more. I'm sorry? Fields of study offered. What do they offer? And what are their strengths and what are their weaknesses? And are they good in the areas that I'm interested in, right? Oh, they've got a great engineering program. I don't want a thing to do with engineering, right? I mean, so there's a variety of, what's the climate like at that school? What's the culture like there? Is it just a party school? I want a party school, or I don't want a party school, right? There's a lot to, notice, even when your aim is clear, you want to do what's best for you, it's not obvious. You've got to find out some information about the relative merits of different places and do a lot of thinking about what package is going to be best for you. Very similar kind of example, a second example, but very similar in kind. Let's project down the road. You've graduated. You've gone to the school. You've done well, got a nice job, nice life. We'll make it very conventional. You're married, you have children, you have a good work, a good job and so on. Oh, well paid, decently paid. But now you get a job offer and it'll offer significantly more money. Nice. Most of us would benefit from more money. Should you take the job? Significantly more money. You might think, well, yeah, But what else? Again, I won't take the time to ask you, but other factors you might want to consider. What would the work be like there? Would I still be doing the things I most enjoy doing or find most rewarding? Or would it really be a very different kind of actual activity that I'd be doing on a daily basis? And is that not what I think I'd most benefit from? What's the culture like at that company? Just as we can talk about the climate or the culture or the atmosphere at a college. Some offices, very cutthroat there, everybody's, competitive with one another or very collaborative or whatever. Like, what's the culture there? Is this going to be work I can do? Is it a good challenge? Is it going to be boring? Is it going to be over my head? What's the commute like there? Are we going to have to relocate? Are we going to have to take the kids out of school? Is it going to be a really long commute so I won't have time with the kids? Will that be a bad thing or a good thing? Maybe I don't want to spend time with the kids. I mean, there's a lot to figure out, right? I know you're not supposed to say that, but just try to see if you're paying attention, right? But you get the idea, right? Even if you want to do what's best for you, money is a factor. Definitely an attractive factor, other things being equal, but those other things usually aren't equal, right? Identical circumstance, and we'll just give you $12,000 more a year. Ooh, $12,000, that got your attention, right? But we all know people who willingly work in jobs that pay less because they think, for a variety of reasons, including they find the work more rewarding, right? That kindergarten teacher might have really been, terrific at something else that's much more remunerative in our society, but chose to do that for a variety of reasons. One more example, again, just to get at, even when you want to do what's best for you, what is best for you isn't always obvious. And this is a more unfortunate, grim example. Have a serious health condition. I mean, you've just been diagnosed with not just a health condition, but like a serious illness. And the prognosis isn't great, but there are treatments or therapies that could help a lot potentially. It's not always clear which therapy to go for. I mean, if you just think of the traditional standard cancer case, should I go with the chemo? Should I go with the radiation? Should I go with the combination? Should I go with the new kind of chemo? Should I go with the surgery, right? Some of the factors that are going to go into that, how experienced is my doctor or the local hospital at that kind of care versus that other? What are the risks? What are the side effects with this one? Again, costs and what will the insurers pay for and how much should I weigh what they'll pay for and so on. Quality of life if I take this course and that. Again, I hope you get the general point at this stage. What's in your interest isn't always obvious. It takes some real careful thought. So if we're serious about pursuing our interest, we have to be serious about giving things that sort of thought. All right, let me move on to a few other aspects of egoism and interest. B, I think on the handout, is egoism is not the same thing as subjectivism. Not anything that you think is in your interest actually is. Your thinking that something is good for you doesn't make it good for you. You might be right about it, you might be wrong, right? The investment, the financial investment that you expect to repay a safe and steady return doesn't necessarily, sometimes it doesn't work out and you lose money. That happens, right? You thought it was in your interest, but it wasn't. Sometimes even the medicine that you're taking that's thought to be the best medicine for that condition, turns out some years later they discovered, no, that's not really good for that. Sorry, we got it wrong. Sometimes the guy you think is Mr. Right turns out to be all wrong. Right? Again, we're not necessarily, we don't have some sort of infallible radar on what's actually good for us. And your thinking that something is good for you, again, doesn't make it good for you. So the implication here is, when Rand endorses egoism, she's not saying, whatever you think is good for you is good for you. No. That's why we struggle to make the decisions about where to go to school or what treatment to get for the medical condition, right? We struggle over those decisions because we want to get them right. We want to make a good decision, and we know that I could make a bad decision, okay? Yet another dimension of self-interest to recognize. Acting in your self-interest isn't automatic. I wouldn't endorse the descriptive thesis that says, everybody does, as a matter of fact, act out of their self-interest. No, I don't think they do. I don't think we do at all. I wish more people were truly self-interested in an enlightened way, but no, they aren't. just as it can be difficult to figure out what's really in your best interest, it can be difficult to do it, even when you know, yeah, this is what I should be doing, right? You might not be in the mood, right? Most people, well, I mean, most of us probably understand, yeah, you know, it's good not to eat a certain kind of food too much, or too much of that, and it's good to exercise a certain amount, you know, for fitness and all that. That doesn't mean we all do that. Right? Because sometimes you're tired, you're not in the mood, you just want to binge, man. You just want to sit on the couch and binge on House of Cards and pizza and whatever, right? And I mean, most people understand, at least, you know, after you get out of college, a few years out of it, you're like, oh, maybe I should start saving for retirement, even though that seems, you know, another country retirement. I mean, most people as they age, even just in their late 20s and 30s, realize, oh yeah, maybe I should save for retirement. And I should sock away money on it, you know, a little bit of money at least on a regular basis and try to, oh man, but that means delaying gratification. I don't want to do that. I want to put that money into that cool car. I want that Tesla or whatever it might be, right? So the sheer fact that you even think this is in my interest doesn't mean it's always easy to do what's in your interest. Another disincentive can be other people's disapproval. It's really hard sometimes to tell the friend who is asking for your help moving this weekend or something like that, no, I really got to tend to my own stuff. I've been, you know, behind on doing my taxes or doing that paper that's due in a few weeks. Ooh, you know, good luck with that. That doesn't always go over well. So sometimes we're kind of cowed into doing the thing that's really better for the other person than for ourselves because it's uncomfortable to pursue our own self-interest. It can take real strength of character, whether it be about investing the money or studying for the exam or what have you, okay? On to D already, yet another implication of these first observations. The pursuit of self-interest isn't always easy, and in a way that's just part and parcel of what I've been saying. The achievement of self-interest can be a real accomplishment. Consider some of the long-range goals that people have. It might be to get that college degree, right? It might be to make an Olympics team, which is a pretty ambitious goal. It might be to run a marathon, okay? Not as ambitious as making an Olympics team, right? But pretty ambitious. I want to be able to finish this marathon or something. I met a young man at lunch today. I was at another school. He wants to be a Navy SEAL. Ooh, well, at first he was talking about he wants to join the military. Okay, great. And then he said, like, I hate to admit this, but he has a pretty ambitious goal. He wants to be a Navy SEAL. Okay. Think about what goes into actually accomplishing long-term goals, especially a little bit ambitious long-term goals. A lot. A lot of planning about all of what's going to be necessary. I mean, if you're just training, let's say you're an athlete, admittedly this is a fairly ambitious one, but you know, the athlete training to make a team, right? Well, that's going to affect when he gets up in the morning, you know, and the diet. Right? And if he's spending a certain amount of money on, depending on the sport, an equipment or a trainer or having to pay facilities that he's got to use to, you know, do his ice skating or whatever it might be, right? That's going to affect how much money he has and his social life on Saturday nights because he's got to be there at 5 a.m. on Sunday mornings, or right? There's just a lot of stuff that's going to be affected by that. Again, now that admittedly is a somewhat ambitious goal. But whether it be, again, getting the BA in the next several years or whatever it might be, think about orchestrating your self-interest overall, right? With a lot of different goals underneath it. Like maybe you want the goal of a rewarding career and having children and having a social life. And right? You've got to orchestrate all of that, coordinate all of that. That's going to be pretty complicated. That's going to take a lot of thought, again, a lot of discipline to follow through in action. So even though we often think, oh yeah, it's easy to be selfish, if you really think about it, and if the selfish is really going to be what's in your interest, it's not so easy to figure out what it is and then to actually act appropriately. So having been fleshing out what self-interest is and isn't, let me say a few more things about what egoism is not, that it's often mistaken for. Quick shot of water, excuse me. Has anybody ever heard of hedonism? Hedon, hedonism. Anybody? Yes. Some of you have? Egoism is not hedonism, but they're frequently confused, so that's why I bring it up. Okay. What's hedonism? Hedonism is the thesis, the idea that pleasure is the standard of value. Pleasure is the standard of value. That's the yardstick of what's good and bad, right and wrong. If it feels good, it feels pleasurable. If it feels good, it is good. If it feels bad, if it's painful or not pleasurable, it's bad. That's the idea of hedonism. That's different from egoism. Egoism says you should pursue your own self-interest. But interest isn't the same thing as pleasure. That's a simple point, but it's a really important point to digest. Interest is not the same thing as pleasure or what feels good. Now, what's potentially confusing is the fact that frequently the two things overlap. There are things that are good for you, that are in your interest, that are also pleasurable. There are certain books that you enjoy reading and you learn valuable material out of them. I mean, sometimes that happens, right? Sometimes you hate the book that you're learning important stuff from. But I mean, sometimes, it was a good read. It was fun to read. It was enjoyable. And it was really useful and helpful. There are people who enjoy certain sorts of exercise that are really good for them. There are people who exercise and hate it every bloody goddamn minute, right? But they do it because they think it's good for them, so that's a case where the two diverge. But again, there are many people who they thrive on their running. I've heard of these people. I think they're a little strange, but there are probably a few in this room. Now, you know what I mean. Again, you've got to make sure you're paying attention. So again, frequently the two things, what's pleasurable, what's in your interest, can overlap, but they also diverge. It can be more pleasant to go to the party, but really in your interest to study for the exam at 8 in the morning, given that you haven't studied enough up to now, okay? It can be unpleasant to go to the dentist, but really in your interest and save you some pain the sooner you go, right? You might feel like telling the boss off, but that might not be in your interest. So again, I'm just trying to get you to pry apart these assumptions that we often make that, the egoist, the selfish person, just does whatever feels good. If he does, he's a really stupid egoist. He's not doing a good job of looking after his interest, because what feels good isn't necessarily in your interest, okay? Egoism is not the same thing as hedonism. Treating pleasure as the standard doesn't serve your true well-being. Okay, let me say a little bit more, because I do want to leave some time for questions. I've got two more things here. Another thing that egoism is not, it's not materialism. Because a person's interest is not exclusively material. Many people think of the selfish person as the acquisitive, right? The guy who wants more toys than everybody else. We have those bumper stickers about I have the most toys or something like that, right? He just wants lots of luxuries. He just wants lots of cool stuff for himself, the latest technology, the snappy cars, the posh restaurants, and so on. That's the image we often have, not always, but that we often have or associate with the selfish person. Now this one, again, it's a little bit tricky to explain the truth here because our interest is in part material. We're material beings as well as spiritual beings. I mean, we have bodies. You're hearing my voice right now, right? We are physical beings as well as other types. I mean, there's more to us than that, but we are undeniably physical, material, and have material needs. So part of what is in our interest is going to be material. But what's rarely appreciated is that your self-interest has a spiritual dimension as well. And Rand recognized this. You don't associate Rand, anybody who knows her, or of her work, you don't associate her with the spiritual, but she used the term. She didn't mean supernatural. She didn't mean mystical, okay? She didn't mean not talking something special like that. But what she meant was non-material aspects of a person's well-being. And we've actually already talked about some of them tonight. When I was talking about people who take jobs that maybe don't pay the most money, but they find them more rewarding or more challenging or more valuable in other ways, it's more spiritually fulfilling, right? When I talked about the pursuit of knowledge, or that knowledge is a value, well, it's not a material value, but it's value. It can really help you in life, knowing certain things. You know, whether we're talking about knowing how to fix the car, knowing how to fix the computer, or knowing certain much broader facts in human psychology, or about economics, or what have you, okay? Some other examples of spiritual goods that affect spiritual well-being. It could be really good to have intelligence, right? A little bit different from knowledge. It can be really valuable to have willpower, to have self-respect, self-confidence. A close friendship is a value that's in your interest. A good, close friendship, that's a real boon to your self-interest. But it's not material. You can't buy it on Amazon. You can buy many, many things on Amazon, right? But they won't deliver that. A good friendship, a strong marriage, a rewarding career, education, art, inspiration, pride, purpose. These things are all values. They're goods, but they're not material goods. But they definitely contribute to a person's well-being. So the point here is, because man, a person, is more than a body, material resources aren't the whole of his well-being. So egoism is not the same thing as materialism. It recognizes that material goods can have real value to you, but they've also got to be measured against other kinds of values that are of real, truly in your interest, okay? And I think when you get that, it can expand your understanding of egoism. It just broadens it somewhat, okay? Final misconception that's prevalent about egoism, that the selfish person is indifferent to other people, cavalier about other people, just out to exploit them, walk all over them, right? You're just extras in the movie being made about me. You're just fodder. You're just, filler. You're just here for my convenience, my disposal. Eat the banana, throw the peel by the side of the road. No, that's not a person who, that attitude toward others is, again, a really stupid, self-defeating attitude. Egoism, rational egoism, does not call on a person to manipulate others, mistreat others, take advantage of others, for the very simple reason that doing that is not in your interest. And it's not in your interest just because, other people might find out you're a creep and they won't like you and they won't deal with you. Other people are potentially a great boon to one another. Think of how your lives have been enriched by certain other people in your lives. I hope you've all had that experience. Some people who you're fairly close to. Some of them might be family members. Some of them might just be good friends. Some of them might be a husband or a wife or, the main guy in your life, right? Some of them might have less personal, direct relationships with, but you might have gotten a hell of a lot out of that class you had freshman year, and that professor. Or just think of the products that other people, anonymous people, I don't know who came up with the remote, but don't you love the remote? Can you imagine life before the remote? My God. And I'm a fan of the mute button too, but anyway. At any rate, main point here. Altruism says sacrifice yourself to others, but egoism doesn't say the reverse. I think it's natural to assume, well, if altruism says sacrifice yourself for others, then the egoist must say sacrifice other people to you, to what you want. No. What Rand thinks is we don't need sacrifice. It's not about trying to get ahead by trying to put you down. I should be looking after my well-being, and if I can advance my well-being, that takes nothing away from this woman's pursuing hers, if she's doing so rationally. And that takes her pursuing her happiness in a rational way. That doesn't take anything from this gentleman's pursuing his, and so on. So our relations can really be win-win. Now, obviously, there's a lot more to say about that. There's a lot more to say about everything I've been saying. And I have pretty much run out of time because I want to give you some time to ask questions. So let me wrap by saying this. I've given you a very quick trot through a lot of ideas that we often have about the selfish person and the propriety of being selfish that I think do need some reconsideration. And I hope that through the examples, you'll see good reason to at least question some of the prevailing wisdom. Now again, what I haven't said anything about is the virtues. Again, Rand espouses egoism as a moral code, as a moral philosophy, and there are more specific prescriptions. She says you should be honest, you should be courageous, you should be just. I've listed them on the handout, right? You should have integrity, you should be productive, you should be independent, okay? I talk at length about these in the book if you're interested, but let me close it. I suppose let me just close it here so that we have some time for some questions if you want. Okay. It's pretty, you know, again, it's pretty out there. It's pretty different from what we normally hear, but I hope you'll think about it. Like, just think about some of these ideas.